Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Sierra, for the warm welcome. I just want to take a moment and thank everyone for joining us today for this, what promises to be really wonderful conversation and session. Sierra, if you could advance to the next slide, please. We can see who is going to be our conversation leads. So welcome to the session. And today we'll be exploring the collective impact model in detail as it's applied by this team, 313 Reads, one of our most impactful coalitions within the network. As you will learn through their story sharing, the collective impact model is commonly used by CGLR coalitions to mobilize and align work, as it is highly adaptable and an efficient model to achieve outcomes at a very large scale. The application of this model, though, is not without its challenges, and we will address these challenges as well in the breakout room conversations, which I'm excited to hold today. Before we get to all of that, it is my pleasure to introduce our conversation leads, the leaders from the 313 Reads Coalition. Please see the biography sheet, which I will post very shortly, to learn more about these impressive leaders. Joining us are Alejandra Gomez, she, her pronoun, Andrea Meyer, she, her pronoun, Jametta Lilly, she, her pronoun, and Leah van Belle, she, her pronoun. Leah will start things off with a land acknowledgement and conversation starter. So I'd like to throw it over to Leah. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Malai. Next slide, please. So we wanted to start by acknowledging that our work here in Detroit takes place on lands that were stolen from the Anishinaabe people, including lands of the Ojibwa, Ottawa, Potawatomi, Fox, and Wyandot tribes. And so we know that land acknowledgements are incredibly important, and also it's a stepping stone for continued learning. So we wanted to provide some resources to add to the ones you already have. There are some amazing ones. And here in Michigan, we often turn to the Confederation of Michigan Tribal Education Directors, who also have amazing resources around teaching from Indigenous perspectives. Next slide, please. And also wanted to share some resources. Very often, Indigenous stories are marginalized, missing, or are perpetually set in historic context. So wanted to share 2 children's books and 1 young adult novel. What's exciting about these is they're all by Indigenous authors and are set in modern day perspectives dealing with critical social issues. So for the check-in, we just wanted to know, what resources or books have you found helpful in centering the stories of those who have been silenced or marginalized? So it could be a book, a film, a podcast. We would love to add that to our list. So we invite you to please drop it in the chat. And I'll pass it back to you, Malai.
Thank you so much, Leah. I just put my book of choice, although not from an Indigenous writer, but I named this book because story resonates with me. My name is somewhat difficult to pronounce, and there's just a lot of lessons from this book. So thank you for this opportunity to share this out. Sierra, if you could go to the next slide, I'm sorry, I'm frazzled now. We'll talk a little bit about collective impact. What I wanted to do is just really share out foundational information about collective impact so that we can move forward with the conversation on the same level. And so why collective impact? Why are we talking about this model? What you see on this slide is a pretty busy understanding of all of the supports, all of the things that we are looking towards in various sectors to support children age 0 to 8. And so there's a lot of these various things that kind of come together and some not come together. And so the collective impact model provides a framework for us to pull and align all of these various things that might be influential as we're doing our work for children age 0 to 8. Sierra, if you could advance to the next slide, and I will share with everybody just the 5 conditions of collective impact. These are some common terms that we'll be using throughout the session, and I wanted to provide just some really quick definitions for these so that we're all working from the same script. Collective impact defined, I have 2 definitions that I can share with everybody. One, collective impact is a disciplined cross-sector approach to solving complex social and environmental issues at a large scale. That definition comes from FSG, which is a social entrepreneur social sector organization. And when we reference some of our resources, you will see the organization FSG mentioned quite frequently. The other organization that you'll see quite often is Collective Impact Forum. Their definition for collective impact is a little bit more broad. So that definition is collective impact is a network of community members, organizations, and institutions who advance equity by learning together, aligning, and integrating their actions to achieve population and systems level change. So that's the definition of collective impact. So there are 5 conditions, and if we had a longer session, we would talk about each one. But today we will just talk very briefly about what each of these terms mean. And these 5 conditions are those essential things which bring together the Coalition for Collective Impact. So first, one is community agenda or community aspiration. This refers to people working together towards a shared vision for change. There's some agreed upon actions that would be in that common agenda, and a defining priority areas. The vision would be the same kind of vision. And there's also values that underpin the work that everyone shares. Shared measures would be the second condition. Shared measures refers to all of the organizations agreeing that success will be measured and reported in a similar fashion. There would be a short list of common indicators that are identified and used for learning and improvement. And these are all agreed upon by everybody who is in the collective impact initiative, whatever that might be. Mutually reinforcing activities is number 3. That means that the diverse stakeholders across the full coalition will coordinate on different activities, but they will be mutually reinforcing each other. When I talk about collective impact in some of the workshops that I've led, I would make note that this is probably if there were a favorite condition, this would be my favorite, because the organizations can maintain their own identity and do what they do well. But what's interesting is that they weave these activities together towards that initiative that everybody is working on, and that stakeholders are using their own expertise, but then weaving that together to reinforce the common agenda that's being uplifted within the organization or the organizations. Continuous communication refers to the fact that all members are engaged in frequent and structured open communication that reinforces trust, assures mutual objectives are met, and everybody has the same information. So everybody is on the same page as far as what's going on within the initiative. And that last one is the backbone entity container. It's a container for change. So that means that there is an independent organization who is mobilizing, leading the groups, providing that ongoing support, and continuously pumping everybody up and making sure everybody is going in the same direction. So when we go into the conversations in the breakout rooms later, you'll see that there would be one from the backbone entity perspective or the steering committee perspective. There will also be a perspective shared out through the program partner. And I feel that these 5 conditions will kind of make more sense as we get a little bit further into the conversation. So Sierra, if you could go to the next slide, I'm going to pitch it back to the 313 Reads team to take us through and share their story so that we can all have an understanding of where we're coming from and how this collective impact model looks in application. So go ahead, Leah.
Thanks, Malai. Thanks so much. So we wanted to do a little bit of framing today and invite us all in. So one of the things that we center in our coalition is we say we are all learners and we are all teachers. And so what we want to do is really honor the expertise of everyone who's here today. Really excited to see all the spaces that you're coming from. And also to say that we're really grateful for the ongoing thought partnering that we've had with other CGLRs. To be able to call up, just as a couple examples, Read by Fourth, and to be able to connect with, I'm blanking, sorry, to connect with some of the other states. That's been really impactful. And for instance, we're planning like a big book project to see how did they navigate that? How are they navigating being a collective impact? What does that look like for them? It's really invaluable. So we want to create that same kind of safe space because it's been so helpful to us. So what we really want to co-construct together today is that this is a brave space for complexities. None of us have all the answers. We all come with lived expertise and skills, but we're all still puzzling through things, and that it's a brave space to say, hey, we're struggling with this, but here's where we're having successes. We also want to have this be a dialogue, so not a webinar. So this is a really great size group. We really hope that we'll keep using chat as a tool for equity of voice. So really love everything that you've already contributed about books and things like that that are centering different perspectives, and hope that we'll continue with the chat. And also, please, lift your hand, come off mute. We really want this to be a dialogue. So just really want to center that. All right, next slide, please. And wanted to kick off by just giving a little bit of context to literacy in Detroit. So Detroit is a city, like many spaces, where there has been historic and systemic racism and other systems of oppression that have led to gross inequities in literacy. So the map that you're seeing is pre-COVID, and it's showing what were the third grade reading levels by zip codes. So you can see that there were some zip codes in the city where third grade reading was around 26%. Which is in the center of the map, that light lavender color. That's also where Wayne State University is. So that's the university area. And then there are some spaces that are below 4%, right? But this was pre-COVID. We also know that Detroit is a city where reading was so poor in the public schools that students led a lawsuit and the school district received a $94 million settlement that really was about their lack of access to reading instruction. So it had to do with things like the conditions of the schools, access to texts, access to certified teachers, but so bad that this huge settlement, and it's now being determined how that will all play out, how that will be allocated. So wanted to give a little bit of that context, but again, this was pre-COVID. And if you could go to the next slide. So now post-COVID, it's worse. About 12.4% of third graders in Detroit are at reading at grade level. And that's from our most recent state literacy assessment called the MSTEP. But there are schools, again, that are below 4%. And the other thing that's really very sobering is that EdTrust Midwest did a really powerful report called Beyond the Pandemic. It's linked there. That not only looks at what those reading levels are, but point to the data that show us that in terms of literacy, access, and equity, that we've slid back to where we were 20 years ago. So the impact of COVID, although we all like to think that that's behind us, the impact on literacy in marginalized communities, it just really widened that gap, which I'm sure many of you are also experiencing in your communities. So we wanted to provide that context. Next slide. Because for us as a coalition, we've worked really hard over the last 3.5 years to really center literacy as a civil and human right. Literacy is about equity and justice, and literacy is liberation. I remember when I first joined the campaign, all the language was around get our kids to reading level, get our kids to reading level. And it was sort of like, there's nothing wrong with our babies. It's about these barriers and systems, and how do we dismantle those and address those together through aligned and coordinated efforts. So really just wanted to give a little framing so that you understand that we're really coming from a place of literacy as liberation, and grade level reading is critical to that. And I'm wondering, I'd love to invite someone if that resonates with you. Is that something that your campaign is also thinking about or has pivoted to? Is that something that you're centering as well? Would really love if someone would share about that, either come off mute or pop anything in the chat.
I'm just going to share that, Leah, this is Malai. You probably recognize my voice.
Okay.
Your framing of this, I just want to lift up one of the other CGLR organizations which do some excellent work in this area and space, which would be Oakland Literacy Coalition. They do speak of the same frameworks with literacy as liberation, and just a shout out to them because they have a conference that's coming in
Saw that.
March of of next year. And I think in the resources, I'm going to be sure to flag that for folks if they're interested in learning more about that org. But I just so appreciate this framing and just wanted to call out one of your fellow CGLRs.
Thanks, Malai. And yeah, and we have connected with them. Their work is incredibly inspiring. So, all right, thank you. Next slide, and I will pass it to my colleague. Oh, no, one more for me, sorry. So the way that our coalition is structured to say, okay, that sounds great. Literacy is equity, access, liberation, but how do you live that, right? And one of the ways that we live that is through a collective impact model. And so Malai talked about what are some of the core components of that. But here's how it looks for us. This is a graphic that comes from Stanford Social Innovation Review. For us, we have, for instance, here, Jametta and Andrea today, who are on our steering committee. So for us, that's an advisory board. And they that board is composed of program partners and funders and system level folks. And then we have the backbone. The backbone team is myself as the ED and two other folks. We're a very small backbone team. But we have working groups. Andrea is also the co-chair of our summer and out of school time table. We also have an early family community literacy table, a youth literacy justice advisory council. So, and we've really, Andrea's going to talk more about this, but have pivoted from sort of just standing tables to meet to actually living that as work groups. Our partners, we call coalition members, and then our partner organization. So all of those working together to say, okay, how can we develop these aligned efforts and strategy and really execute them in ways that are built on consensus, but that we all collectively own a piece of. And it's been really exciting to see our growth in this over the last few years, and we'll talk more about that. Next slide, please. And so for us, the key levers and how we work towards that literacy equity, it's interesting when I look at this, I think a lot about this diagram, which is represented in lots of different ways when you look at collective impact. And I would say a few years ago, we really were a bit in the disorder and confusion, which is not uncommon. And I think we're really moving very solidly to that third. And on some projects, I think we're at the fourth, but we're still, you know, in that range. We're still figuring all of that out. But for us, the first lever, as we mentioned, is centering literacy as access and equity and justice and liberation, like absolutely unapologetic. The second one is collective learning. So that's been really interesting for us because that's what we call professional learning, because for us, it's collective. Again, we're all learners, we're all teachers, we're learning together. The other one is common assessment and data. We mobilize Acadians as our common assessment. And then policy advocacy for literacy equity. So we don't convene a table for that, but we roll up to other systems level tables. And then collective funding, which is new for us. So we're really seeing the need to be much more strategic about collective funding. And across all of that, the goal is to have shared messaging. So those are the levers that we're using to try to get to that space of literacy, access, and equity. And next slide. And now it's you, Andrea.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Leah. Your insight and expertise there is so helpful and so easy to follow. I think it's amazing. I also totally agree with what you mentioned, that we were at kind of this disorder space a few years back. But what was incredible is that everybody stayed the course and really brought their voices forward and made sure that we were talking together about what would get us to that coordinated effort and collective impact. So I can talk a little bit about the first couple of these. So the original campaign for grade level reading in Detroit was started several years back and kind of phased out. It was under the umbrella of Excellent Schools Detroit, and the effort there kind of folded, but there were folks that were part of that are still part of this work. When it reignited, the backbone teams included an organization called Brilliant Detroit, and then also the United Way of Southeast Michigan, and kind of brought this back together and started bringing the partners back into the work. The second piece around like revisiting our theory of change and the metrics was really, really important. Originally, the metrics were set to say, like Leah mentioned, you know, we want a 3% increase in student proficiency systems wide. And when we really took a really close look at the work of 313, it's clear that that's not the impact that we're having. We can't be responsible as a coalition for individual student level proficiency change. Their students are in schools, they're in after school programs, they're in tutoring, they're working with their churches, they're getting literacy from a lot of different places. And we knew that that wasn't the place that we had control of. What we did have control of was who is supporting students in those spaces and what kind of skills do they have. And so the switch came in our theory of change and in our metrics to say how many partners are participating, how many are willing to share data, how many are going through those communities of practice and collective learning to skill up their teams to then deliver more powerful programming to students, and how we could support that. And that's where we had control, and that's where we really focused our energy. And so we realigned the vision and mission around that idea. We ignited our theory of change, and we knew that that would mobilize the lever that we could control. I love, Malai, how you talked about the like weaving together of different programs, because that's the key. This work has to be embedded and entrenched in the work of the organizations that are partnering. They may have a piece of it and not the whole picture, but we want to make sure that we're not asking folks to pivot and do something different. We want to lean into what they're already doing and build up the skill set and the understandings of their team, or the access to resources and things like that. So that was a really big piece. Yeah, please. Yes.
So one of the things that we did was, you know, we have program partners who, probably very similar to you, have been serving families and children for generations and are moving mountains every day, right? And leading with love, radical love, and respecting and honoring all that they're doing, also recognizing that some of them were really excited to be providing literacy programming, but had had very little access to any kind of professional learning or training. We mobilized a survey of our program partners to learn more about how they train their tutors and mentors. And some of them, actually about 70% of them, said they only provided 0 to 3 hours of training for those folks. And there were several of them that said, we don't provide any training. There's kind of like an orientation, but no training. And so what that meant was realizing that for some of our kids, when we look at those data, which we just saw, and these are kids who, you know, as they're coming into programs, have great need. These are, you know, some of the most marginalized children in terms of access to literacy are getting tutoring from folks who've had no training in that. So if we think about, you know, multiple tiered systems of support, you know, this is like tier 3 instruction, mentoring and tutoring one-on-one or in small groups by folks who haven't really had the training. And so what we really committed to was, how do we build on all the amazing things that these orgs are doing and say, let's get you the tools you need so that you can have the impact that you're seeking, right? So that, you know, Andrea's mentioning that, like, revisiting our theory of change, it's like, okay, we're not serving little humans directly, but we can make sure that those who are, like, do you have what you need? Do you have the training? Do you have the curriculum? Do you have the tools? Like, that was a huge shift for us. And a lot of that has been, and Alejandra is going to talk more about this, but like really building at the speed of trust and really respecting what folks are doing. Thanks, Andrea. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thank you. And then when we think about the charter and the governance that supports this work and really helps us make sure we're all on the same page, we have that shared communication, we didn't really have that built out until year 5. And so knowing that we were operating ahead of that, but then coming together and saying, what do we want this to really look like? How are we gonna come together and work together? We moved to a model of consensus. And so making sure that the majority of folks were on the same page about it, that other folks were saying, you know, I might not be at 100%, but I'm ready to move this forward together. So that one was the last piece that that we really focused on. And Alejandra's going to talk about the other points.
Thank you, Andrea and Leah. I think as we think about what Leah mentioned, moving at the speed of trust is also ensuring and knowing that trust does take time, and also balancing with the work needs to happen yesterday. Like the important work, it needs to happen as soon as, you know, as possible. Also understanding that organizations and collective impact and the format, even historically, how organizations maybe were, you know, trusted at some point, you know, and were let down. And so I think, how do we ensure that now we move forward with that speed of trust, and ensuring that we're bringing all of the organizations that need to be part of this to the table to make the decision, and not just here, this is what we're going to do moving forward. Are you with us or you're not? Okay. So being able to have that collective vision together, as many of us are in different states and different and also different areas and work. So for example, in the work that I do, I oversee after school program directly that provides that support to youth. And so it's really cool to see what these different resources and different ways that we can work together, you know, and to be able to do that. And I think also, as we know and realize that we also in talking about value add and ensuring that we're able to provide what is needed by the organizations and the partners, is also being able to understand what is collective impact. I think there's been a lot of different information, a lot of different definitions of collective impact, but what we want to do together, and something that we've been a part of, it's the Detroit wrote down, because I am it's DCIC, but it stands for the Detroit Collective Impact Collaborative. And we are in this with different collectives, and it's really cool to see the different spaces and the different areas that they're in. Some of them are a little bit further into their work, some of them are just starting, some of them are reimagining and rethinking what can collective impact look like. So that's been a really cool space to be able to just level set, learn together what is collective impact, how do we want to interact together, and then being able to, you know, pivot the work. And I think most recently being able to provide a space that we not only share out lessons learned and information, but how do we bring everyone together to do the work and, you know, think together. And it's really easy to say, you know, this is a question, bring back the answer in a couple of weeks. A lot can happen in a couple of weeks. And so how can we together work in these meetings and be able to, you know, move the work forward quicker as best as possible, but also as we do the work together, that's how trust is built. So
Alejandra, can I pop in for a sec?
absolutely.
I am modeling having a conversation, so someone please come off mute. So, you know, one of the things that we really realized was that we were 5 years into this coalition and hadn't really had training in like what is collective impact, right? Like you can read an article about it and that's like really interesting and powerful and that's important, but also like how to have some really structured learning and coaching. And so co-writing a grant with Hope Starts Here to bring in 2 consultants from Collective Impact Forum. So for the last year, we've been working with Junius Williams and Paul Schmidt. That's just been change making. So to really learn about what are evidence-based leading national practices in collective impact and work as sort of mentor text for things. So as we were building out, like Andrea mentioned, we said, hey, you know, we still don't have a charter and governance, like we need to have these things. Being able to look at sort of models, that's been critical because, you know, for a lot of us, we were trying to live this work, but didn't really even have yet like a shared vocabulary or understanding for what that means. So, and that work is ongoing with Detroit Collective Impact Collaborative, but it's been really powerful for that learning. So that's something that that I'm curious about other folks. Maybe you can drop it in the chat if you don't want to come off mute, but if you are mobilizing collective impact, how are you getting folks up to speed in that, right? Like, is it like an orientation? Is it training? Like, how do we make sure that that folks who are living this work like have what they need to do it well? Thanks, Alejandra.
Absolutely. Thank you, Leah. Great. So, oh, do you want to add anything to this slide, Andrea? Okay,
No, I don't think so. I was going to say we're good for the next slide, I think.
perfect. Yeah, next slide. So as we think about this, the work and thinking about some of our proof points, some of the things that we've been able to do and see, as we mentioned, we're part of the Detroit Collective Impact Collaborative, where we are able to ask these questions of what is actually needed, even for staff and partners to be able to engage fully into this model. And also something really cool that we've been able to do and see is having through and through Reads provide tutoring trainings for mentors, for direct staff who are doing the work, to be able to have a fundamental framing of how to support students. Something that we've seen is, as we personally help with homework and things like that, we want to ensure that we are supporting them in their learning, and we're not just giving them the answers. And we have the tools and resources. And what we've seen is that this not only starts and ends in 3rd grade. We work up to 8th grade with 8th grade students, and we see that even our middle school students need a lot of support. So being able to have these conversations of like, these are the resources that are for the 0 to 5, 0 to 3rd grade. But what are the resources that we can start thinking about collectively to support the students who might be in middle school who are also not reading at grade level? And so that's something that we've been wrestling with, thinking about as well, and how to be able to support tutors and mentors to support the students and the families, as well as doing it in a way that's culturally competent. As many of the tutors and mentors are from the community, have experienced similar things that students have experienced in the school setting, in the community. How can we support them and the students to look at themselves as when they're reading the books? And sort of the check-in question that Leah presented is super important, because we know that there's more books out there that we can show and teach our youth about, so that they can see themselves in these spaces, they can see themselves in those areas. And so and then there's the literacy assessment core, as well as Acadians and data coaching. So there's a lot of there's support even for us as we work with Center for Success to provide the support of administering the tests and to be able to understand where our youth are, but also coach our staff. How do we support the youth in that? And so Leah, Andrea, Jametta, does anyone want to add anything to this board, or anyone else have anything?
This is Malaya. I just want to call out something in the chat. I was typing it, but it was taking a long time, which is that I will be sure to give the follow-up resources information from the chat, and transcribe all of that so everybody has that. But I just wanted to make note that all of these wonderful conversations that are also happening in the chat box will also be shared out in the follow-up. And so please keep those comments coming. I'll make sure to get those out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd like to offer, so thank you to my colleagues who are speaking on this. I'd like to offer one of the other challenges I believe that gets lost sometimes is when we use the words collective impact and then we use the word collaborative. And that we know historically that there's been collaboratives, and that collaboration, in fact, has its own mechanics to it. And not everyone has experienced it. So we know now that we have a new approach, which is, the collective impact model, which is a structure in itself. So I think one of the things that all organizations need to be mindful of is, do they in fact have people who've ever experienced what real collaboration looks like? What does that look like at the community level? What does that look like at a cross systems level? And in fact, had there been successes? So I think another important barometer that people always need to be thinking about is, what is this thing called collaboration? Because collaboration really is built on the spirit cooperation. So if that doesn't exist, there needs to be a lot of thought and a lot of energy to go into that, the values that need to be driven, the behaviors that support that, because otherwise we are in fact really kind of wasting our time if we are saying that we're doing collaboration or that we're actually implementing collective impact. So there are lessons to be learned in looking at a great deal of maybe 30 years of collaboration between community-based organizations, government, and schools, focus on improving school readiness for children. So, and really important, I saw someone else mention the focus on the whole child. So I would encourage all of us to, while we're creating, it's so exciting, is that we're also, as Leah said, we're learning, we're moving back a little bit to move that knowledge forward and infuse that into the work that we've doing. And I'm so proud of the work that our folks have been doing in Detroit to struggle with all of that, being informed from the past, using what we're doing right now, and being very focused and intentional about how we build the future that we want for our children and our families.
Yeah, if I can piggyback on that, Jametta, because there's some work happening in Detroit. For instance, you see on this slide, Youth Development Resource Center, YDRC. They don't identify as collective impact, and that's not necessarily their model, but they're a powerful collective having tremendous impact system-wide. So, I think it's this idea that collective impact is one way of doing things. It's the way that this coalition, chose. But it's been really interesting to me to connect with lots of other CGLRs, like Oakland Literacy, that don't operate from collective impact model, but are still doing really powerful work, right? So, but for us, it was until we got some of these sort of organizational pieces and the structures. Someone on our team page, they really describe it beautifully, that if we're not really intentional, that collective impact models can just perpetuate the very power hierarchies that they were created to disrupt, right? And I think about this thing that they say all the time, right? So how do we make this so that there is shared ownership, shared decision-making? Yeah, so think a lot about that. But yeah, really grateful to you for bringing that up, Jametta.
Agreed, Jametta. You always just hit it right on the head and are so eloquent in the way you describe it. I would also offer that you see funders listed on this page. There is a real need to be very clear with funders who are often putting out RFPs for collaboration, that they need to also be very clear in funding the work that it means to cooperate together. You can't just throw out a new partner and program together. You have to have your orgs mesh and the folks on your teams work together, trust each other, make it work, and make it make sense for both and all organizations, or else it's going to put pressure in ways that aren't going to be in the best interest of our kids. So I think that's another piece of this, is now having the conversation with folks who want to see this continue, that they have to be able to be willing to fund it, be willing to see mistakes be made and fixed, to look back and reflect and then move forward. Those are really powerful things to make sure that you're willing to be bold and ask for. And it's easier to do that from a collective point, right? To say we're all feeling this, we're all having this pain point. And I know we're going to get to the pain point. So let me go to the next slide, and we can talk a little bit through some of the collective planning that we have been really successful with, and the convening of partners in a couple different ways. So very recently, we hosted a Right to Read screening of the documentary Right to Read, and there were, Leah, you can help me, maybe 25 partners. There was a lot of partners that were involved in the planning of it. And we came together and said, how do we want this to look? How do we want to make sure this happens? And then who is putting their name next to the pieces that we need to make it happen? And so 313 convened that conversation, but all of the partners were taking chunks of it. One partner was making sure that there were books available on site that families could go through and take home with them. Other partners were bringing food and resources. There were tables of resources for families after the screening to sit and talk to different partners and programs about programming that they could participate in and their students could participate in. There was an advocacy call at the end of the screening. So all of that came together because the partners trusted each other and said, we want a shared experience of how this will happen. And then everybody shared it out to get folks there. So we had a really great evening with a lot of different people that learned about new organizations. That same type of effort is happening now around Black Children's Book Week. So last year was the pilot year of Black Children's Book Week, and it was beautiful, and some partners were involved, but this year will be system-wide, and hopefully a larger percentage of the partners will be involved, to bring authors and books to the children, to families, to hear from local authors, to read culturally appropriate books for everybody. Like, it just is a beautiful way to bring everybody together. We also are really, really excited about this Books in the D project. So this was lifted by one of the partners in the coalition, who actually brought it to me, and I was like, we can't do all this. We need 313 Reads to really mobilize this. This is exactly the kind of project. So we are going to be capturing and receiving over 60,000 brand new books in Detroit to get directly into hands of kids. It's incredible, but it is going to be a monumental effort, and we all are going to be involved. So from one organization that's willing to open their doors and let us take over their gym for a few weeks so we can get all the books in, reorganize them, package them back out, to organizations that are going to help mobilize volunteers to be there, to then all of the partners that are going to say, this is how many books we need, this is the kind of books that are going to serve our kids, this is another really huge effort that cannot be done alone, has to be done with partners. And we're coming together. I think when we talked at the beginning about the mutually reinforcing activities, right? This is true for our partners. Books in hands of kids is really important to folks who are doing early childhood literacy and doing some parent engagement around early literacy development. Is also really important for our partners who are in the elementary space, and building home libraries and making sure kids can be excited about books and take something home with them, to our young adult, learners in the middle school and high school range that maybe are feeling a little disconnected and don't know what books to choose. Like, there's different reasons why these different efforts are important, but everybody is mutually coming together and saying, yes, this is important for the work that we're doing individually.
Andrea, can I pop in again?
Yeah.
Catherine, great question about the adult literacy component. So that actually is named in our 3-year strategic plan, although there is now a task force coming together around adult literacy at the city level, and it looks like we'll be a part of that collective effort. So we've also been really mindful, like for instance, with policy, we knew that literacy equity policy needed to be a part of our work, but we realized we didn't need to convene a separate table or work group for that we needed to roll up to other work that was being held by organizations like MyPAC or Ed Trust Midwest. So yes, that will be a part of it. But also someone mentioned in the chat, and I forget who, so I apologize, about repairing harm. So as Alejandra and Andrea are talking about these proof points, what's really striking me is that there was harm done, and some of that harm was clustered around the common assessment. So Acadience is mobilized. It was Dibbles, like paper-based initially. And I'm thinking probably many of you in this call also mobilize a common assessment of early literacy. But the data we're getting back to folks way past the time even kids were in programming. There was very little training for the folks who are administering the assessment. Like, it wasn't good. And program partners were saying things like, well, we're only doing this to basically be a good friend to the coalition. It's like, oh no, that's not what we want. Like, we want this to be a value add to you and the little humans that you serve and your continuous improvement. So we've worked really hard over the last couple of years. Amber Gustafson on our team, she's our assessment manager. She's led a lot of this work. We've had Anna Harani from Wayne State and Adria Truckenmiller from Michigan State University working with us, to the point where we have a really rigorous training for this literacy assessment core of community members. They have to pass now a performance assessment before they're mobilized to assess. We got funding to pay them to do these assessments. Like, these are things that we really had to listen to the program partners and hear, we are not serving you well, we're doing harm. We need to make sure that we are. And so now being at this pivot point of, it's not just about assessing a bunch of kids, it's how do we use these data to help inform programming and to help move towards literacy equity. Amber's been doing a lot of data coaching, just one-on-one, but we're still working to build trust. And there are still partners who aren't mobilizing the assessment. And we're really, working to build the data literacy to help folks understand that it's really important to have valid, reliable assessment of literacy, if you want to look at the impact of programming. So it's this really exciting proof point, and yet it's still something we're grappling with, right? How do we continue to build the trust?
Yeah, I would love to be able to just back on two things that you guys were saying. Andrea, I just want to say high five to the 10th power as we talk about the relationship that has to exist with our funding partners. To do collective impact work is you have to be in it for the long haul. And the long haul isn't a 2-year, a 3-year, even a 4 or 5-year grant. So it means that not only do we have to have people like we have that have come together who are mission focused and understand that we have this commitment, we need partners. And so we're really blessed because not only have we had partners like the Kellogg Foundation, Skillman, Fisher Family Foundation, McGregor Fund. And so I'm naming several that are supporting not only 313 reads directly, but the partners who are part of the work, because the collective or the collective impact entity is only one part of the iceberg. It needs to have all these other organizations working together to leverage their own funds to give life into the kinds of not only activities and strategies that the coalition then can lead. So it's important that also that leaders in your organization, that if you're part of that table, is to look at your own budgets and see how can we help to further our collective goals. Because I think that's one of the pieces that often wary about because they're wondering, so if we're funding this, how are you beginning to change even your own budgets, your own practices, your own policies to further the work of the collective impact, or I'm going to say the coalition? You bringing that up, and so it's really important that we engage funders in this learning cycle, and that we come at it just like we do systems of care, understanding that we have historical inequities around power. So let's talk about that, and then how do we strategize to create that kind of equity, Leah, that and Andrea and Alejandro, we're all talking about, not just at the program level, but also begin to have those conversations really intentionally at the systems level, and money and funding has to be part of that conversation.
And I think you're the next slide, Janetta.
So did I give myself my own segue? Didn't even notice that. So I do want to really lift up that all good things take work, right? All good things take work. And if you've ever been involved, and many of you, as I look at this space, it's really such an honor to be in a space with people who believe in collective impact, believe in collaboration, and believe in using every resource that we have to make a difference for our children and families so they can thrive. And yet we also know that underlying so much of the challenges of our own communities, the challenges of our communities, is really looking at what are the funding models that can not only support the development, but more importantly, the sustainability. And so, like many others of you, we've been engaged at this for quite some time. We have just a number of proof points. You're hearing both Andrea and Alejandro, and certainly I can say with our organization, Detroit Parent Network, we are the beneficiaries of our collective work. And just as Leah said, that we are going to have over 60,000 books distributed, and with new partners coming to the table, universities, businesses. So that gives us an opportunity to then say, this isn't just about the people who understand the importance of literacy and the tools and strategies to do that, but how do we begin to expand this notion to new stakeholders to begin to move the needle. By the same token, the reality is that we're now, and some of you have experienced this, are now looking at, well, how do we sustain this? Because if any major entities, particularly backbone organizations or others, don't have that funding, that puts people like Leah, many of you are executive directors as well, it keeps us on the hamster wheel, doesn't it? It keeps us always in pursuit. So one of the things that we would recommend that is so important, that not only are we looking at funders, but that we have to also talk to funders about that unsexy word called indirect funding, which is the reality is that funding sources generally apply their funds to programs. But last I looked, it still takes money to run the van, to fix the handicap, to make sure that there's resources that are not funded by that. So I want to encourage all of you, just as I've taken some leadership in this and talked to others, all of us that are in leadership positions with our funding partners need to be saying, in order to do this work, there are intangibles and critical elements of funding that fall in this indirect area that are not funded by you, but in reality create risk for organizations that are trying to do this work. So I just kind of want to lift that point up. And then also, I think the other piece of it is that certainly in the work that we do for the partners have to have memorandums of understanding, and that we come together periodically to, in fact, review, are we doing what we said we were going to do? And if not, to have some honesty about why we haven't been able to. And then collectively, how do we begin to remedy whatever might be those barriers where people are not implementing not only the letter of the MOU, but maybe perhaps even the spirit of it. So that's a critical element. There's a backbone, but then there's also the steering group. And there has to be commitment to not only everyone being at that table, but also looking at the finances and to push and pull and walk with the backbone organization to assure that there's continuity in the funding. And last but not least is that, and certainly we can say this, and I'm happy to say this, Leah has been a phenomenal executive director and leader for us with our 313 reads. Both her heart, her passion, and her competency just ooze all over the place in the work that we do. And we would not be where we are if it wasn't for her tenacity. And yet we also have to recognize that in most of our cases, and I'm just going to hit pause, I'm just kind of wondering in the chat, could you say, if you are heading up a collective impact organization right now, do you ever feel that you don't have quite enough staff to do the scope of the work that you know you are charged with? Just curious. Or shout a hand in the air or a heart. Because to do the work requires staff. To do the work requires staff who are talented, have the resources to move us forward. So I'm looking in the chat and I see a couple of hands in the air. This is a reality. So if we're not being clear in the formation of our organizations, in the formation of our collective impact, that one, we're asking for funders not only to be with us in the long haul, we're asking funders to be sensitive to work with us to help identify perhaps some other resources and donors to help with the reality of indirect funding. This indirect funding is needed to sustain institutions. In addition to that, that we're focused on our MOUs and that we're being honest with each other and supporting each other. And quite frankly, pushing each other when necessary to meet what and honor what we said that we would do. And then lastly, that you're really focused on members of that collective impact, making sure that your backbone team has what they need. And if they don't just look at them like, well, why haven't you done this? That we come together and say, in what ways? Because certainly Andrea and many of us on the steering committee have looked at ways that we can either leverage, participate, or infuse our own resources to do the work, because it is our work, because it is our work, our mission, and these are all of our babies. So those are some pain points. We find ourselves now needing funding, even though we have tremendous proof. even though in fact we are now at the point that we have new and what I call unusual suspects at the table. So it's a lesson learned, but it's one that we are continuing to struggle with, and are delighted about new partners and others. And so we welcome these, anyone who has these ideas, because we know the funding landscape has changed. We understand that our funding partners have shifts in their own strategic goals. But we want to say and use us as an example that even with great outcomes and partnerships, you can find yourself in this odd space of, to whom else can we turn to continue this great work? So there's some lessons learned there, and we encourage you to be mindful of that continuously, as well as if there are other sources as we're moving forward. We would certainly welcome those kinds of opportunities. But those of us who've been in this the long haul, we know this is good work, but it's long and tough work, and it requires funders to be at the table with us as partners in.
Jimetta, yeah, as always, like your wisdom and insights are so invaluable. And speaking about that capacity piece, I popped in the chat a PDF from FSG, and it's sort of like a sample staffing model. And what's been really interesting is, our backbone is a team of 3. It's myself as ED. We have a data manager, Amber, and we have a director of projects and operations, Paige. What's really interesting is when you look at this model from year 2 on, it's looking at, 6 people. So for instance, we don't have someone who does comms. Like that's me sitting, up at night on Canva, like not
On
doing
Canva, right?
right, like, but I'm trying. And so I think one of the things that we definitely did not plan well enough for at the onset of the coalition is the ramping up, right? Like as it grows, the backbone team has to grow. And here's an important reason for that. We had a meeting yesterday of our summer and out of school timetable, and we're talking about mobilizing all the things we need to mobilize for this amazing influx of books. And all the folks at the table who are leading programs or foundations or at the state, they're really busy and they have capacity constraints. And so we want to be realistic about inviting folks in, engaging them for that shared ownership of moving the work forward. But also the backbone team needs to hold some of that to keep it moving forward. We can't, just ask folks to carry all of that. The backbone team we see is a key role as helping shoulder some of that and move it forward. But without an adequate team, more and more of that responsibility then is going to fall on the folks at the table. And one of our tables, and it was the summer out of school timetable, sort of balked at one point and said, we're being asked to do a lot of things here. And so we sort of had to listen and hear that and say, okay, let's be really intentional about moving this project and this project forward. We'll pause the others. So just like recognizing capacity. And for me, it's always really interesting. You probably do the same thing. You go to the websites of other CGLRs and you're exploring and to see what their teams look like. And, many of them that are having great impact have very robust teams. But again, as Jametta's pointing out, like that takes robust funding and making that compelling, that indirect funding compelling to partners. Next slide, please. So I think we lifted up a lot of the things that we're excited about, the ownership, and as Jametta mentioned, the collaborators coming in. That's been really exciting to see that as we really pivot more to work groups and action oriented. Now for Black Children's Book Week, there are like 5 new partner orgs who are saying like, we want to be a part of this. And that's their entry point because it has direct value to them in serving the families and the children. So really excited about that. And then I think the next one, Malai, is the framing of the breakouts.
Yeah, I wanted to acknowledge the story sharing that all of you did to kind of frame out how this plays out with a community in the work. And so I appreciate all of your different perspectives. And this is where we will take this a little bit closer into the perspective of the program partner with some key questions here around things that are pain points for you all.
Yep, of course.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So there's a Padlet. If you click it in the chat, let us know if you have any issue seeing that. Alejandra, should I also share it maybe just so we can see ideas that are going on there?
I think that sure. I also have it with like I have my screen split, so I'm looking at that as well. So I can bring up the ideas if that's okay with everyone, just so that we can
Yeah.
see everyone and have a
That
conversation.
That sounds
Perfect.
great. This Padlet's gorgeous.
Thanks to Leah. She
Right.
did that for us. So
Beautiful.
there's a few kind of overarching questions, and maybe Alejandra, I'll talk through the first one and then we can switch out. The first question that we wanted to dig into is around the value add to partners in joining a collective impact. You know, we really want to make sure, like we talked about, that there's something in it for them, their programming, their organization, their participants. So not only what's the value to partners, but then what's the cost to partners in terms of their capacity? You know, do they have to divide someone's job responsibilities to be able to attend meetings? Do they have to hire on somebody new or identify somebody on their team? Do they need to, you know, skill up and train somebody to participate? What are the things that orgs might need to do, and how do we navigate that? Because if we don't make it accessible and reasonable and elevating to organizations, it's not gonna have the intended impact. So we're happy to scribe and put notes in. Please also, if you haven't used a Padlet before, at the very bottom of the screen, there's a plus and you can add something, or at the top of each column, there's a plus and you can add, it'll pop up a box that you can add. Just type in and hit publish and it'll go right into that right spot. But please also come off mute. You know, this is something we want to learn together with you. We certainly do not have all the answers.
Thanks, Andrea. And my white time is poor, but I'm going to try to restrain, but I can speak from a program partner perspective when I was a community lead, but I want to wait and see if others have something to share before I launch in.
Hello, my name is Jerry Maxwell Jones, and I live in Columbia, Maryland. I'm a member of the Bronze Villagers, and we have started a program about 4 years ago to address the reading needs of African American children in our community. Because we find with the data that has come from the state that our children are not meeting the capacity for entering kindergarten ready.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's been our focus for the last 4 years, approximately. It'll be 5 years in March. So we're, you know, tugging along. However, this summer, our outreach to the community has just really taken a big jump. And we have been able to connect more positively with some of the organizations. And we have been able to increase our online coaching with our parents. It's just doubled. And we started doing this because of the pandemic. We were going to outreach to parents in the community through the churches. And unfortunately, you know, we got shut down as everything else shut down. And so one said, let's go online and let's do it through Zoom. And so that's what we did. And it has been just a wonderful experience. We have graduated some 4 or 5 year olds to enter kindergarten, and the impact of coaching our parents how to become more engaged in their child's learning has just been tremendous, and we've been able to see the results. As we have outreach to the community, we have kind of come a little stumbling block in that people want us to join their group, but as a kind of a fill-in for what they're not doing. And we want a partner who is ready to, get out in the community and raise money, collect resources and things of that nature, not to fill in and take up the space that they would have, the educational space that they would be engaged with us to be able to do the things we might mutually be want to do. So it's been an interesting position to be in. You have an organization that that might be able to support, but they have their agenda as well, and so the minds have to meet. And so I was thinking about the resources and things that you all have done, and it's just wonderful. How many years have you been engaged in doing this in the community? And I know many of you are connected with resources, governmental resources. So how many years have you been in existence? I'm sorry if I didn't catch that in the reading.
No, that's okay. So we have been, 313 Reads has been active for about 7 years. But prior to that, there was a campaign in Detroit that kind of sunsetted, and then this kind of rebirth from that. So some of the partners were participating in that earlier work, but this has been about 7 years. But again, a really major change at certain points in the journey.
Good. Okay.
And the work that you're talking about sounds incredible. So thank you, Jerry, and thank you for sharing. Is there anyone else that wanted to comment? I see some comments coming right into the Padlet, but if anyone wanted to share some of the ways that this, like joining collective impact is helping add value for partners, or also kind of putting a strain on partners as well.
I have a follow-up question too along the vein, and this was a comment that I did put into the Padlet. My experience from community work in a smaller community, more rural community, is that there might be volunteer capacity strain of, especially during the summer. Jerry, I don't know with your program if you offer summer programs, or Teresa or Alexa or Joanne, if you offer summer programming in your respective communities. In the community that I used to work with, we're competing for volunteers from the same pool of people. And that was something that was really hard to navigate, about which program would get the volunteers that would be most valuable. And so I'm curious if anybody else had that kind of challenge, or what you did to work through the very important resource of human people who can read to kids during the summer, or who can support programs during the summertime.
We didn't have a summer program per se, but we did provide the parents with activities to continue the reading and math activities, and we posted them on the website monthly.
Oh, that's great.
My program is from October until May, and
got it.
And so during those times we offered them and resources, and letting them know what resources and programs were available in the community that they could take their child to.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, I would amplify that, Jerry. I think that's one of the things that's been beautiful about the work here, is that if a family's needs don't fit with a particular organization, they may learn about Center for Success first, but maybe the times we offer program or our locations in the city are not the right fit. Then we have an amazing group of other partners that we could say, this is a better fit. This is, this might be a more realistic spot for after school for you, or a summer program that might fit a student that's outside of our age brackets that we serve, or something like that. Or knowing that we, if we can't serve a program this year, but we want kids to be engaged, I think, that's a great way to refer to a network of really trusted partners. So we know the handoff is going to be one that family is going to feel served and respected, and like it's picked up right away and it's not handing off to someone that never gets a name off a waiting list. One other thing I wanted to lift.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I was
No,
going to say,
go
I
ahead.
think that's the value add. I think you
Right.
nailed it, is that you have trusted partners that you know in a niche area. Even like if you know for sure that another partner within the coalition can better serve a child or family because of some specialized needs, you hand that off, and it's a relationship that's preserved. So thank you for putting voice behind that. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, please don't be. I think one other value add that I think has been really profound here is that often organizations may feel a certain sort of hesitation to bring you know, if something's not going well, if a goal was not met, or if there's a need more than what a funder might be willing to hear. But we're pooling our voices together and saying, no, we're all feeling this pinch. We all need this additional, whatever it is, resource around this or support around this. It doesn't feel as individualized or as threatening almost to go to a funder and say, you know, this is a hard spot for us. But if everybody's saying the same thing, then that group ask is a little bit more, is easier to make. So that's been something I think that has been a value add as well.
With community organizations serving children, and I've shared information to parents and organizations to provide to families. I've also testified before the Board of Education and County Council in, oh my gosh, is that, yeah, I don't know, y'all. Michigan for me.
Probably
so
Maryland, maybe.
Maryland. I don't know why I want to say Minnesota, but that doesn't.
Yes, it's Maryland.
Perfect.
I did work helping underserved communities to have services during the summer, and I'm continuing to work on it. And that's why I'm here today.
Thank you so much, Joanne. And so in supporting the schools, budgets, and PTA support underserved communities with educational resources. So thank you for that. And I try to capture some of the things that you mentioned, Jerry, about the online coaching. So being able to provide those resources to parents, to be able to increase that capacity outside of the organization and being able to support the parents in that way. And so there's been things that have been added. Again, feel free to let us know to add them, or as you're talking, I can take some notes. And so with the second set, is how are we listening to program partners and honoring their contributions? How are we valuing their time and expertise with things like stipends? And so what are some things that, as you think about the work that you do, what that would look like, or even if you're the partner, what would be nice to receive and to have as well?
I always give it the full teacher pause because I want to make sure everyone has a chance to jump in. One thing that we did grapple a lot with, and Leah lifted it a little bit, was really listening to partners when we first mobilized an assessment. The lift was really, really heavy on partners. And we know that as much as trust is important with our partners, it's even more deeply important with our families and students. And so when 313 team would come in to do assessments, the families had never met them before, had never seen them. It was a different level of comfortability, being able to, you know, as a student, being able, as struggling student that's trying to read at grade level, you know, having to now read in front of somebody new that they didn't know was really difficult. And so we had to give that feedback really clearly to the team and say, like, this isn't working. The scheduling was kind of a nightmare. Like, all of those pieces were not fitting together, and it was putting a lot of contention on the relationships with our families because they knew us. They didn't know that other entity coming in, and so that we had to do a lot of work kind of pushing back on that. And then some of the data was directly didn't like correspond to the data that we had on students. So we thought maybe that was a little bit of it. So that kind of trust piece came up a lot. All these breakouts happen so fast.
I know. And this one's going to close pretty soon. I want to just take a moment to acknowledge everybody that came in and participated in this conversation, either via chat or Jerry, by you sharing your story with us. We so appreciate that. We're going to go into the main room and talk a little bit about what we learned from each other, and then we'll wrap up this session. But I just wanted to give a quick shout out to Alejandra and Andrea for leading the conversation. So thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Reading, which goes across multiple systems and sectors, and is an entrenched issue that is tied to race, class, region. So you put all that into a gumbo pot, and it's tough stuff. So I think sometimes we've got to hit pause and have some real discussion about this is a complex model, a complex topic. So how do we fund and find people that understand that and really roll up their sleeves, are willing to dive into it? Because even if funded, people are wondering, are you going to be there for us when we hit year 3 and we only have half of our outcomes done because we didn't anticipate this, that, or the other? So I think that's a question. And then going back to my original premise, which I really want to stand on and emphasize for us, is that these are two complex things to do. And so unless we understand that, then we can't be intentional about how best to strategize to address it.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree with that. And I think the history of Richmond and kind of the historical inequities and systemic issues, but also just how the governance and kind of local governments are set up, because the cities in Virginia are separate from the counties. And I believe we're the only state that's like that. So the Richmond public schools are just on their own. And so all the counties are kind of like, oh, well, that's not our problem. It's a very segregated, interesting system on how it works. And so especially getting all of these places to come together in different school systems and just to do collective impact feels like even more of an uphill battle on top of all of the historic inequities. So
well, come to Michigan.
And
we have over 500 school districts. I think we're almost walking up on 700. So, and just in our Wayne County, we have our public system, which is the largest. Then we have 45% of our kiddos are served in charter schools too. So again, complexity that's there. So you're not by yourself with that kind of structure. I'm just wondering with some of the other folks, does anything that we were just mentioning about the complexity and structural challenges of this, is some of that your reality? Leah, can I ask one other question, or kind of to the two folks that I'm wondering? You mentioned, if I could, when you were just mentioning about a community foundation, in many cases, a backbone has a steering committee. So for the development of our collective impact, we have a steering committee. And as Leah said, it's an advisory group to the core group that is the backbone. So one of the things that we have to really talk about is, what does that really mean? Is an advisory group functioning like a board? Because then that's a different level of responsibility. Or is it a collective of people who are working out of consensus, and ultimately, though, the backbone entity, who is the fiscal entity who hires the director? You see where I'm going? There's a difference. So I'm curious structurally how some of you have addressed that. But I will say, from many years, I don't mind saying I have 30 plus years, and I have the heel marks of collaboration on my back, because I believe in it. And so I wear them proudly. But I know that this issue around structure, decision-making in systems is something that is the tough stuff that goes on, because we can create all the cool events in the world that we want. But if we're not addressing the policy issues and having an infrastructure to address those policy issues, we're going to kind of find ourselves here again in the next decade, not really having moved the needle. I'm just wondering, Leah or others, any thoughts about that whole notion of structure relevant to steering versus board, different systems, the isms that exist in those systems?
I'll share with everyone. So, hi everyone. I'm in Canada, and I'll share with you one of the things that we've been doing. So it's not so much an initiative, like 313, but one thing that I kind of oversee is we have a council where we bring together all of those organizations in the child and youth sector, and it's pretty much for the most part CEOs of all these organizations that come together. And I think right now there's around 70 or so of them. And it's to talk about, what are the issues that we have in the sector? What are the gaps? How can we work together? How do we want to address policy, etc.? So we backbone it. But because we really want this to be community led versus like us as the backbone making all the decisions, we have two co-chairs that basically kind of run all of these council meetings and so forth. And so as a backbone, I'm there to make sure administratively they've got what they need. I make sure that I do a pre-planning meeting before every meeting with our co-chairs. We do a debrief with the co-chairs after, again, to just, again, make sure they're kind of moving in the right direction and they don't steer off course. But in the past, it was different. So we, as the backbone, led it, did everything. But we found that from a systems change approach, we wanted to be more community driven. So that's why we kind of stepped back, and that's why we brought these co-chairs in who are CEOs of some of the organizations. We don't really have governance per se, but again, it's a very different type of way that we've gone about it. Doesn't mean it's easy, doesn't mean that we don't run into a lot of, this wanting this wanting that. But then I think sometimes we have to step into lead, how will that decision making happen? Like, do we do a vote? Do we do it how do we go down those paths? But so anyway, a little bit of a different style, but I thought I'd just share it because it's a different perspective on something that's, again, it's a community kind of network that we've established.
Carla, that's actually
really quick. What's we? Are you at what city and what's the we you're speaking of? What organization are you representing?
United Way. And I'm with, so United Way, Calgary area. So we're in Alberta.
Alberta. Okay. All right. Thanks.
And it's not that different than, sorry. It's not that different than how we're approaching in Detroit. We also have like co-chairs for the table and are, co-planning and debriefing and trying to own some of that administrative. I think the big shift we've made since we started working with the consultants from Collective Impact Forum is previously for us, United Way of Southeast Michigan and Brilliant Detroit were sort of framed as the co-backbones. And as we've grown our muscle for understanding collective impact, we understand, they're the host organizations. The backbone is that dedicated team. So like myself, Amber, Paige, it's that dedicated staff who are doing the kinds of things you're naming, Carla, but that the goal is to have a neutral convener. So the backbone is serving as that. And so then it's for us, we're in that space now of thinking about what does it look like for the host role? And what is the ask of the host to help be a neutral convener? And it's tricky, right? Because like one thing we're really learning when we look at national models of collective impact is it's not necessarily a program of the host organization, right? So now the host can do things like our HR rolls up to them. We pay our health benefits through them, right? They typically support with things like fund development by supporting with some of their team. But it's finding that host that the collective work is going to be a value add enough to them that they are willing to say, yes, we want to be a host to this, but we understand we aren't leading the decision making. It is by consensus. And that was something that was important in our charter. We literally mapped out, how do we vote on things? And how do we build consensus so that we can be really clear on that?
Can I
Yeah,
ask a
that's-
question? Sorry.
Yeah.
I apologize. My camera's off because I'm supposed to be sneaking into another meeting. But two things. Number one, it really grieved me as an educator to see the percentages for the grade level. But I'd like help. So one of the things we're struggling with in my nonprofit, our little mighty, small but mighty, is we're really struggling with I would say the imputation of Black inferiority, because those who are our current grant writer and potential funders keep wanting to push us into doing tutoring and mentoring, even though we've developed this really dynamic nature, place-based, culturally responsive program with amazing and local instructors. We keep getting shifted into the remedial category. And so it's hard for us to get collective impact because we can't even align on what the messaging is for what we do. And so how do we invest in collaboration if we're still struggling with people like understanding that we're not in the remedial group, we're doing enrichment?
I mean, I can.
We're both going, what? Go ahead, Leah.
No, so one of the things that's in our strategic plan is that we want to have more engagement of orgs like yours that are doing enrichment to incorporate literacy into it. So I hear your perspective, right? Like, so, I think about things that my son is in that aren't literacy tutoring, but they're very important for him. However, our stance as a coalition, and this is my deep, deep personal stance, is that teaching children to read and teaching them to read well and giving them that tool for self-determination, civic engagement, liberation, like that is important justice work. But I really I hear that phrase like remediation, and I just sort of like balk at that, right? It's like, they don't need remediated, they just need access, damn it. So it's, but like you're saying, like they're whole human beings. And so I think about some of the programming that happens out of our public library. One of our co-chairs of our early family literacy table, she, as the children's librarian for the Franklin branch of the Detroit Public Library, she does amazing programming. It's not tutoring, but it's really important because it's growing book joy and love of learning. And I love.
Right. So I think it's at this point that we would like to offer just a couple of minutes to share some of the things that were uplifted in the conversations. And so I would like to pitch it to my colleagues who are in room 1. So that would be Alejandra and Andrea. If you could just maybe give like a sentence or just a 1 minute takeaway, and then we'll pitch it to Leah and Jametta, and then I'll close out the session today.
Alejandra, do you want to say anything or do you want me to jump in?
You can just jump in, and then if I have anything to add, I'll do that. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. We had some folks coming in and telling us about where their work is right now and what it looks like in the community, where it may have started in one organization and now there's some efforts to connect together with other organizations. And there may be some resistance to that, likely around some capacity issues. And also that the work, it's meaningful to each individual organization, but then being able to bring it all together under one umbrella is the hard part. Malai lifted that often in smaller towns, I would say even in Detroit, which is a rather large city, that the same pools of volunteers are being tapped to help with literacy programming or to help with reading with kids. And so being able to make a larger ask and connect to a wider net of folks who want to be volunteers and support this work is really important, but that can be really hard with individual organizations kind of all going, and I think that's true of funding as well, kind of seeking the same dollars and resources, including volunteers in that human capacity. So those were some of the things that were brought up. What did I miss that we also talked about?
I think you nailed it. Thank you so much. Alejandra, did you have anything else to add? Nicely done, Andrea.
Yeah, I was just gonna quickly add the piece of being able to provide the resources and the tools to parents to be able to provide the support to students at home, and in a way could help increase capacity. So thank you.
Great, thank you. And we just put up our poll for this session today, so please do fill that out. And while we're listening to Jametta and Leah summarize takeaway. What can I speak? Takeaway points from their room.
Leah, you want to go ahead?
Sure. We didn't even get to our Padlet. The conversation was so juicy and rich and really,
That's
really
awesome.
grateful for that.
We heard a couple of things. So one, it was delightful. We were talking about the reality that there are people in the community with organizations who know how tough collective impact really is. And because when you know how tough that is, you might be reticent to take that on. One, do we have the infrastructure for that? Do we have the adequate staff? And do we have funders who are going to really be with us across the long haul for success? I think the other thing that we heard was that there's different approaches. Is the backbone organization should in fact be a host versus being the leader and the convener of everything. Those are two different approaches. Also, organizations need to make sure that they have an MOU that articulates the roles and responsibilities of each of the partners, and then determining the methods for even identifying conflict resolution and moving forward if in fact people are not meeting what that MOU is. And lastly, making a distinction between a steering committee, an advisory group, a board. That discussion needs to happen and be intentional in the early stages in order to enable everyone to work in the spirit of cooperation towards the mission.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, so that's valuable because those roles are all different. So I'm going to go back and watch the recording of your conversation, because I think that's a really important piece too. That
We
each
just
of
touched
those
it on the
roles are
surface though, right,
different.
Leah? Just a
Yeah, I
touch.
know, we need more time.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that very much. So I just want to say too, that we will make sure that all of the notes, conversations, recordings, all of that stuff gets put into the follow-up message too. So please don't feel like you missed out if you joined one room instead of another. So thank you so much for that. Sierra, if we could go to the wrap-up slides. Oh, is this one of yours, Leah?
Yes.
Yeah, go
So we
ahead.
just,
Sorry, go
yeah,
ahead.
thank you, Malai. We just
Yep.
wanted to give everyone we're extremely grateful to be here, extremely grateful that you are here, and for the teams who put this together. It's been a really great conversation and being able to learn together. So as we are ending the session, before we leave, the reflection question is, what is one thing you learned or you're excited about for your work from today's conversation? So if you could just put it in the chat, that would be great. And again, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate that comment. Can we have a part B? Yes, we can do that. Please reach out to me and we'll organize that. I'll make sure that that happens, because I think that this work is complicated. The mobilization component is also really important as we try to move through and make impact together for children and families. And so absolutely, we can have a part B. Let's go to the final piece. I'm going to wrap us up with some celebration, which would be about our Pacesetter honors and Bright Spot honors that we recently held. This is for campaign communities that did some submissions for stories. And so I just wanted to share out those communities that we're recognizing as having exemplary work. So these would be models that we would be sharing out through future engagement. Sierra, if you could go to the next slide. We'll have the names of those superstar communities here. These would be communities that I'm happy to connect anybody on this webinar with. And for Leah and your 313 Reads team, these will be the connections I'll be making to in the future for future work. So thank you for those Pacesetter honors. And we've got just a couple more communities to honor. So next slide, please. Bright Spot communities here for some of their work with Campaign for Grade Level Reading. One more slide. and Communications Expo. So Communications Expo was about messaging, websites, newsletters, videos, and things of that nature. And so these are our superstar communities from that sharing. So one more slide, and then I will close us out today. Oops, one more, sorry. We have some upcoming webinars that will be happening. There's one this afternoon that's happening around learning supports the Mississippi Miracle. We have a funder to funder conversation coming up with learning loss recovery conversation coming up mid-month, and then a peer exchange at the end of the month. So it is at this point that I really want to thank you and acknowledge the team with 313 Reads for all of your work, your thought partnership with today's conversation and leading this really very rich discussion. I'm excited to work with you again and to connect with everybody to hold a part B, whatever form that takes on. I really appreciate your time and energy today. So thank you so much. And I'll be sure to send out all of the information in the follow-up. So have a great afternoon, everybody. We appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Blessings to all. Take care.